welcome back to whispers in the dark. Dim the lights, settle in close, and let the room around you grow quiet. What you are about to hear is born from an old fairy tale, but not the softened version told to children before bed. This is a darker telling, one that remembers the roots still clinging to the grave soil beneath the story. This is Rapunzel, as a nightmare whispered through rotten leaves, and spoken through a locked tower window by a voice that was never meant to sound human in the dark. There once lived a man and his wife in a small house built so close to the forest that the roots of the trees seemed to press beneath the floorboards at night. Their home stood at the edge of a forgotten road where few carts passed and fewer people lingered. Moss crept up the stones. Rainwater gathered black and still in the ruts outside. In winter, the forest wore a hard white silence. In summer, it breathed and sweated and hummed like a living thing too large to see all at once. The villagers never built closer to those trees than they had to. They said the shadows there had memory. They said names spoken under its branches did not always come back alone. Behind the couple's house, there stood an old wall of gray stone, taller than any man, set around a garden. No villager had ever entered, and no child had ever dared to peer into for more than a heartbeat. The mortar between the stones was dark with age and mildew. Ivy wound itself through every crack as if the wall were being slowly strangled by green hands. On wet evenings, the stones shone like skin. On moonless nights, the whole thing seemed less like a wall and more like the side of some buried ruin pushing up from beneath the earth. Everyone knew to whom the garden belonged. It belonged to Dame Gothel, who was also known as Mother Gothel, a woman so old that people spoke of her as if she had always existed and had merely chosen, from time to time, to let herself be seen. Some called her a sorceress. Some called her a healer. Some called her a thief of years. The few who had looked her in the face and lived long enough to speak of it afterward never agreed on what they had seen. One said she looked like a noblewoman clothed in green velvet, pale and beautiful and soft-voiced. Another swore she was bent and black-toothed with long gray hair hanging like wet rope. A miller insisted that when she turned her head too quickly, her neck seemed jointed wrong, like the neck of a bird. An old widow said Dame Gothel's eyes were the eyes of a drowned woman who had learned to pretend. What they all agreed upon was this: she was feared. Her garden was feared. And no one who trespassed there ever did so without paying dearly. In that little house by the wall, the wife became with child after long years of grief and longing. At first, joy filled the rooms and softened every worn thing. Her husband smiled more. He patched the roof with better care. He brought flowers from the roadside and laid them in jars on the table. But as the months passed and the child grew within her, the wife began to change. Her appetite turned strange. She would wake from shallow sleep with her hands clutched to her belly and whisper that she could smell something green and cold on the air. Not herbs from the market, not cabbage from the field, something sharper, something alive with wet earth. Day after day, She stood at the little rear window of the house and stared through the cracks between the ivy leaves clinging to the garden wall. One evening, when the sun was sinking red behind the trees, and the shadows had lengthened enough to join across the ground like grasping fingers, she saw them. They grew in neat beds under the weeping branches of black willow trees and along the edges of pale stones. Rapunzel. Tender green leaves with white roots hidden beneath dark soil, glistening with beads of evening water. They looked more vivid than any plant she had ever seen, almost as if lit from within by a weak green fire. She pressed both hands to the glass and felt a fierce hunger seize her so suddenly she nearly cried out. From that day onward, she could think of nothing else. She spoke of the Rapunzel leaves morning and night, their crispness, their scent, their bitterness touched by sweetness. The husband tried to soothe her. He brought turnips, lettuce, onions, carrots, leeks, every green thing the market had to offer. She pushed them away. Her cheeks hollowed. Her skin went dull. There came a feverish brightness to her eyes that made her husband frightened to meet them for long. Again and again, she whispered that if she could not eat the Rapunzel from the garden behind the wall, she would die. At first, he begged her not to say such things. Then he pleaded with her to wait. Then he began to believe her. She grew weaker. Her lips dried and cracked. She sat by the window staring through the ivy as if her soul were slowly being reeled through the wall toward that forbidden patch of earth. At night, he woke to hear her talking in her sleep, not in words he knew, but in soft, wet murmurs, as though she were answering someone standing just outside the glass. Once, half dreaming himself, he thought he saw a shape in the yard beyond the window. Tall, thin, still as a tree trunk. He blinked, and the shape was gone. At last, terror overcame caution. On a night when no moon showed, and the forest was thick with fog, the husband climbed the garden wall. The stones were slick and cold beneath his hands. Ivy tore under his fingers with tiny ripping sounds. When he swung his leg over the top and dropped down on the other side, he landed in soil so soft it gave under him like flesh. The smell of the place struck him at once. Wet roots, crushed leaves, old water, and beneath it, all a sweet rot like flowers laid too long on a grave. The garden was larger inside the walls than it appeared from without. Beds of herbs and roots spread in careful order, though some were strange to him, and some looked less like plants than like things midway through deciding whether to crawl out of the earth. White blossoms opened in the dark and shone like staring eyes. Long vines hung from trellises and moved though no wind touched them. Somewhere water dripped with steady patience. Somewhere else something breathed. His hands shook as he knelt in the Rapunzel bed and tore up as much as he dared. The roots came free with a sticky sucking sound. Dirt packed beneath his nails. He felt watched every second, certain that if he turned his head, he would find someone crouching inches from his face. But the garden remained silent, except for the dripping and the breath, and the faint whisper of leaves rubbing together overhead like dry tongues. He climbed back over the wall and returned home with the stolen Rapunzel clutched to his chest. His wife devoured it, She washed the leaves and roots, though not very well, as if she could not bear the delay. She made a salad with oil and salt, and ate with both hands at first, then more slowly, eyes half closed. Some color returned to her cheeks. Some life came back into her limbs. Her husband, relieved beyond measure, almost wept with gratitude. But the next morning, the hunger was worse. Now that she had tasted it, she desired it with a desperation that frightened even her. Her hands trembled when she spoke of it. Her breathing grew quick and shallow. She said she could still taste the cool bitterness on her tongue, and it had awakened something inside her. She begged. She sobbed. She said the child was asking for more. So that night, and the next, the husband went back. Each time the garden seemed subtly changed. Paths curved where he did not remember them curving before. Plants leaned closer. Pale blooms opened wider. Once he stepped on something that cracked underfoot, and when he looked down, he found not a root or branch, but a tiny white finger bone, no larger than a matchstick half buried in the dirt. Another time, he heard a woman laughing softly just beyond the willow branches, though when he turned, there was no one there. On the third night, as he filled his apron with Rapunzel, a voice rose from the dark behind him. "How dare you?" He spun around so violently that the roots scattered from his arms. Dame Gothel stood at the end of the bed. She was tall, wrapped in a gown the color of deep leaves after rain. Her hair, dark in that light, flowed down her back in a heavy braid threaded with pale things that might have been flowers or might have been bones. Her face was thin and elegant, almost beautiful, but wrong in ways the eye could not settle upon. Her smile was slight. Her eyes were terrible. They seemed green at first glance, then black, then glassy and colorless as stagnant water. The night around her felt drawn inward, as though even the dark itself served her. The husband fell to his knees and stammered out the truth. His wife with child, her craving, her weakness, his fear that she would die. Dame Gothel listened without blinking. When he had finished, she stepped close enough for him to smell her. Herbs and rain and the sweetness of old decay. She laid one long hand against his cheek, and though her skin appeared smooth, it felt cold and dry as paper left in a tomb. "If your wife was so desperate," she said softly, "you should have come to my door." He could not answer. I might have given what she wanted. Her fingers slipped from his face to his throat, not squeezing, merely resting there with easy certainty. "I will allow you to take as much Rapunzel as you wish," she said. "Enough to feed her until the child is born. But in return, you must give me the child." The words entered him like ice water. He tried to speak and could not. She smiled then, and for the first time, he saw that her teeth were very white and very sharp. "You will give me the child," she repeated, "and I will care for it as a mother. Better than you can. Better than she can. Refuse me, and your wife will waste in her bed while the thing inside her feeds on what little remains. Refuse me, and I will take more than a child from this house." The husband thought of his wife at the window, pale and hollow-eyed, whispering that she would die. He thought of the old stories. He thought of the hand on his throat and how little effort it would take to close it. He bowed his head to the soil and agreed. When the child came into the world, it came on a night of thunder. Rain hammered the roof. The forest groaned and tossed. The midwife crossed herself more than once because the candles kept guttering low, though no draught touched them. And because each time the laboring mother cried out, something answered from far off in the trees. At last the baby was born, a little girl with a furious red face and a voice sharp enough to cut through the storm. The mother reached for her at once, exhausted, shaking, full of tears and love and dread. There came a knock at the door, not loud, not hurried, just 3 patient strikes. The husband went white. The midwife looked from him to the door and seemed suddenly to understand something she did not want to understand. Before anyone could move, the latch lifted on its own. The door opened inward. Rain hissed in the darkness beyond. Dame Gothel entered without invitation. She was dry. Not a droplet marked her gown or her hair. She moved through the room like a shadow cast by no visible body. The candles dimmed as she passed. The newborn child stopped crying at once. The mother clutched the baby to her chest and begged. She wept. She promised anything else. Years of service. Gold they did not have. Prayers. Blood. Her own life. Dame Gothel stood beside the bed and watched her with an expression almost tender. "No," she said. She took the child from the mother's arms. The infant did not cry. Tiny eyes, not yet able to focus well on the world, seemed to fix on Dame Gothel's face with eerie calm. "Her name shall be Rapunzel," said Dame Gothel, and smiled as if at some private joke. Then she left. The storm swallowed her shape. The door closed. The mother screamed until her voice broke. For days afterward, milk came into her body and had nowhere to go. The grief of it turned feverish and wild. It is said she never truly recovered. Some claimed she saw a little golden-haired child at the edge of the forest from time to time, always just beyond reach, always vanishing when called. Others said she died not long after, staring at the wall behind the house, as if listening to something on the other side. As for Rapunzel, Dame Gothel carried her deep into the forest, to a region where the trees grew so thick that sunlight arrived in thin gray strips, and even birdsong seemed afraid to linger. There, beyond marsh and thorn and twisted oak, rose a tower of old stone. It stood in a clearing where nothing else grew except a ring of withered grass. No road led to it. No door broke its side. No stairs wound within or without. There was only one window near the very top, narrow and black from a distance, like a socket in a skull. The stones of the tower were damp and furred with lichen. In the cracks between them, tiny pale mushrooms clustered like dead skin. Ravens perched on the rim of the roof and watched in silence. This was where Dame Gothel kept the child. How Rapunzel's earliest years passed, no one can know fully. Yet the The forest remembers things. The tower remembers more. Children raised apart from the world do not grow as others do. They begin to mistake the shape of their prison for the shape of existence. The walls become horizon. The window becomes sky. The voice that visits becomes law. Dame Gothel brought Rapunzel food, garments, books without titles, combs of carved bone, and candles made of yellow fat that burned with a smell like sweet smoke and marrow. She taught the girl letters and songs and the names of plants. She told her of the wickedness of men, the falseness of women, the hunger of the world beyond the trees. She called herself Mother when it pleased her, and Dame Gothel when she wished to inspire awe. Sometimes she was gentle. Sometimes she was cold. Sometimes she vanished for days and returned with mud on her hem and something dark under her nails, smiling to herself. Rapunzel grew. Her hair came in bright as spun gold, so thick and lustrous that in candlelight it looked almost alive, a river of warm metal flowing over her shoulders and down her back. Dame Gothel tended it with obsessive care. She brushed it by the hour, murmuring charms beneath her breath. She oiled it with infusions of herbs and strange resins. She forbade Rapunzel from cutting even the smallest lock. By the time the girl reached maidenhood, her hair was longer than the room itself, coiling across the stones like sunlight dragged underground. The chamber at the top of the tower was not large, but it was high and circular, with a sloped roof crossed by black beams. The single window looked over a sea of forest. In summer, leaves stretched unbroken to the horizon. In winter, the bare branches resembled thousands of hands lifted in silent pleading. The room held a narrow bed, a carved chest, a table, a stool, a spinning wheel, shelves of dusty objects, and a little iron mirror whose surface seemed to deepen rather than reflect. Sometimes Rapunzel stared into it and thought she saw movement behind her when the room was empty. Loneliness shaped her. She sang to fill the silence. Her voice, pure and bright at first, deepened with age into something haunting, rich enough to move through the forest like mist. Animals gathered below to listen. Deer lifted their heads. Foxes paused at the edge of the clearing. Owls blinked from branches. Even the ravens cocked their necks and went still when she sang. Dame Gothel loved the singing because it made the tower seem less dead. Yet there were rules, and the rules were iron. Rapunzel must never leave the tower. Rapunzel must never lower her hair, except when called by Dame Gothel. Rapunzel must never speak to strangers. Rapunzel must never ask what lay below in the rooms that had no door, in the sealed dark heart of the tower beneath her chamber, where sometimes, in the middle of the night, she heard faint knocks rising through the stone, as though something trapped far under her floor was seeking a way up. The years passed until Rapunzel was 12, then 14, then 16, and at last 12 years had fully gone since the child had been taken. She became very beautiful, but not with the ordinary warmth of village girls laughing in sunlight. Hers was a beauty shaped by isolation. Skin pale as milk never touched by day. Eyes large and solemn, reflecting sky and candle flame alike. Lips soft and often parted as if listening. And all around her, always, that unbelievable golden hair, heavy enough to drag at her scalp, thick enough to braid into ropes. When Dame Gothel wished to climb to her, she would stand below in the clearing and call in a voice that cut through wind and birdsong alike. Rapunzel, let down your hair, that I may climb the golden stair. Obediently, Rapunzel would unfasten her braid, coil after coil after coil, and cast the mass of gold from the window. It would spill down the side of the tower like captured sunlight, reaching all the way to the ground. Dame Gothel, though no longer young, climbed with terrible ease, her pale hands gripping the hair and the stone, ascending as swiftly as a spider. The first time Rapunzel questioned any of it, she was perhaps 17. Why must I remain here? She asked, as Dame Gothel brushed her hair one evening by candlelight. If the world is wicked, could I not still look upon it from below? Could I not walk in the clearing? Could I not feel the earth with my own feet? The brush stopped. In the silence that followed, Rapunzel could hear the wind moving around the tower, and beneath it, something soft scraping far below. Dame Gothel leaned close to the girl's ear. When you were born, she whispered, the world opened its mouth for you. I closed it. I keep you here because I love you. Her voice was sweet. Her hand on Rapunzel's shoulder was gentle. But when Rapunzel glanced sideways, she saw in the mirror that Dame Gothel's face had gone thin and hungry, her eyes wide and bright in a way that made the girl's stomach turn. After that, Rapunzel did not ask again for many months. Still, thought is a seed that grows even in stone. One spring afternoon, as sunlight poured through the window in a rare warm beam, and dust turned golden in the air, Rapunzel sang. Her song drifted out over the trees, and for the first time someone heard it who was not beast or witch. A king's son rode through the forest that day hunting deer. The deeper he went, the quieter the woods became. His companions fell behind because the paths narrowed and vanished. Soon he found himself alone beneath branches so thick they seemed to drink the light. Then the singing reached him. He reined in at once. It was the loveliest voice he had ever heard, but there was sorrow in it, so deep it unsettled him. Not the ordinary sadness of longing or loss, something older, something sealed away. He followed the sound through bramble and shadow until he came to the clearing and saw the tower. For a long time he only stared. The old stone, the high black window, the girl framed there in light. She seemed less a person than an apparition, something set in the tower by enchantment, like a jewel in a ring. Her hair shone around her. Her hands rested on the sill. Her mouth opened in song, and the prince felt every hair rise on his arms. He called out, but she did not hear him or pretended not to. There was no way up, no door to seek. At last, he withdrew and hid among the trees, determined to return. That evening, just before twilight, he saw an old woman enter the clearing. She appeared from between the trunks, as if the forest had shaped her out of shadow. She stood below the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, let down your hair, that I may climb the golden stair." The prince watched, astonished, as the golden mass fell from above, and the old woman climbed. The next day he returned, and the next, desire mixed with curiosity, and curiosity with a sense he could not shake that the tower held more than beauty. Sometimes he thought he heard faint sounds from within the stone, not the light movement of one person, but slow knocks, a dragging hush. Once, while waiting in the trees, he saw something dark pass behind the window, though Rapunzel sat facing outward. It moved too tall and too narrow to be her. When he looked again, it was gone. Still he came back. At last, when he was sure Dame Gothel had departed, and the clearing lay empty under the violet hush of evening, he stepped from the trees and called upward in imitation of the witch, "Rapunzel, let down your hair, that I may climb the golden stair." Silence followed. Then there came to the window a pale face, startled and uncertain. For a heartbeat, Rapunzel only stared. This was not Dame Gothel. This was a young man, broad-shouldered, cloaked in green, his face handsome and open and alive with nervous wonder. She had never seen a man near her own age. She had seen no one at all except Dame Gothel for longer than memory served. She ought to have drawn back. She ought to have screamed. Instead, after a long, trembling pause, she loosened her hair and let it fall. The prince climbed. When he entered the chamber, Rapunzel retreated to the far side of the room, one hand pressed to her throat. Up close, he saw how beautiful she was and how terribly strange the tower had made her. There was a stillness in her movements, like that of a creature raised in a cage. Yet her eyes were quick, with intelligence and hunger for the world. He bowed and tried to reassure her. He told her he was no thief or harm-doer. He had heard her song and been drawn as by enchantment. He spoke gently, and because he was young and earnest, and because no voice like his had ever spoken to her before, she listened. Their meetings became secret and frequent. By day he returned to his father's court, but whenever he could escape, he came through the forest to the tower. He brought stories. He told her of rivers broad as roads of silver, of towns loud with bells and market cries, of churches and horses, and winter feasts, and summer dances, and children running in fields. Rapunzel listened, as if each word were food. She touched his cloak, his hands, his face, marveling at the simple reality of another human life, not wrapped in spells and solitude. He brought gifts as well. A ribbon blue as noon, a silver ring, an apple red and fragrant that made her laugh when she bit into its sharp sweetness. She gave him songs in return and secrets she had never spoken aloud. How the tower moaned in storms. How Dame Gothel's footsteps sometimes continued long after the witch had left her chamber, descending inside the walls where no stairs should be. How one night she woke to find Dame Gothel standing over her bed, not blinking, merely watching. How the iron mirror sometimes reflected the room, with someone extra in it. The prince urged her to flee. "At night I can bring a rope," he whispered, "or silk, bit by bit, we can descend. I will take you far from here. We will marry. You will never see this tower again." Rapunzel's face brightened with hope so painful it almost looked like fear. Yet doubt remained. "Mother Gothel will know," she said. "She knows when the wind changes. She knows when I cry. Sometimes I think she knows what I dream." "Then we must be careful," said the prince. So each time he came, he brought a length of silk hidden beneath his cloak, and Rapunzel concealed them. She began to weave them together in secret, so they might one day form a ladder. With every knot she tied, freedom seemed nearer. With every passing visit, love deepened between them, and the tower, once a whole world, began to feel like the inside of a coffin. Yet secrecy is a frail thing when fear gnaws at it. One day, as Dame Gothel sat combing Rapunzel's immense hair, the girl spoke without thinking, carried away by hope and absent-mindedness. "Mother Gothel," she said, "how is it that you are so much heavier to draw up than the young prince?" The room went still. Even the candle flame seemed to hold its breath. Dame Gothel's hand froze in Rapunzel's hair. Slowly, very slowly, she set down the comb. When Rapunzel realized what she had said, all color drained from her face. She turned and saw that the witch's expression had changed into something so nakedly full of rage that it no longer resembled any human face. "You wicked child," Dame Gothel hissed. The voice did not sound like hers. It sounded layered, as if many mouths spoke through one throat. "So this is how you repay me. I who kept you. I who fed you. I who saved you from the greed and lust of the world." Rapunzel fell to her knees, begging forgiveness. But Dame Gothel seized the golden hair in both hands. From within the folds of her gown, she drew a pair of shears black as iron and snapped them open with a sound like teeth. "No more," she said. The cutting began. Rapunzel screamed as the first great length fell. The sound was not only grief. The hair was so bound up with her life, so cherished and enchanted by Dame Gothel's own hand, that the severing felt like the stripping away of skin. Lock after heavy lock crashed to the floor. Gold piled around them like slaughtered sunlight. The chamber filled with the smell of crushed herbs and something acrid, as if old magic were burning. When it was done, Rapunzel's head hung shorn and ragged to her shoulders. She looked smaller, younger, and unbearably vulnerable. Dame Gothel bound the severed braids together with calm, efficient hands, while tears streamed down the girl's face. Then the witch dragged Rapunzel from the chamber. There are places in old forests where the land itself seems cursed. Briar fields where thorns grow taller than men. Wastes of cracked earth where no bird sings. It was to such a wilderness that Dame Gothel carried Rapunzel. Some say it lay beyond the forest. Some say It lay within another fold of the same enchanted wood. There the witch abandoned her among stones and thorn scrub beneath a sky wide and merciless. Rapunzel, alone for the first time in her life without tower or wall or familiar prison, sank to the ground and wept until dusk. Back at the tower, night fell. The prince came, as he always did, with love in his heart and another length of silk beneath his cloak. In the clearing, he looked up and called softly, then louder, "Rapunzel, let down your hair, that I may climb the golden stair." From above there came the whispering slide of hair dropping down the stone. Relieved, smiling, he grasped it and climbed. When he reached the window and hauled himself over the sill, Dame Gothel was waiting. She stood in the center of the chamber, with Rapunzel's severed golden braid coiled in her hands like a living snake. Candles burned low around her. Their smoke hung greasy in the air. The floor was strewn with short-cut strands that shone dull in the dim light, like filaments from something butchered. The prince recoiled. "Where is Rapunzel?" Dame Gothel smiled. "She is lost to you," she said, "a bird without song, a flower withered in the waste. You will never see her again." The prince rushed toward her, but she lifted one hand, and he stopped as if struck. Not by visible force, but by something that seized his muscles and held them tight. Her eyes gleamed. "You came climbing for beauty," she whispered. "Now keep what the tower gives." She moved toward him, and the room seemed to lengthen impossibly, its shadows stretching until the corners ran black and deep. For an instant her shape flickered. He saw not a woman in green, but a gaunt figure with limbs too long, fingers jointed like roots, hair streaming as though underwater, face split by a smile much too wide. He cried out and stumbled backward. There was no floor beneath his heel. He fell from the tower, down through cold, dark air, down past stone slick with moss, down into the ring of brambles below. The thorns were long and hard as nails. They received him with a wet, tearing sound. One pierced his cheek. Two drove into his shoulders. Several, finer and crueler, plunged into his eyes. His scream echoed through the clearing and into the forest until birds exploded from the trees in frantic clouds. When he awoke, he could not see. Blood had dried across his face. The world was pain and damp earth and the taste of iron. Somehow he dragged himself from the brambles, blinded, broken, and stumbled into the woods, calling Rapunzel's name. No answer came. Thus began his wandering. He moved through wilderness and village and mountain path like a living ghost. Beggars gave him crusts. Shepherds turned him from their fires in fear. Children stared. Rain washed his face. Snow settled on his shoulders. He walked by sound and touch, carrying grief heavier than hunger. Again and again, he asked after a maiden with a voice like silver bells and hair once brighter than gold. Some laughed. Some pitied. Some crossed themselves at the tail of the tower and the witch. Years seemed to pass through him rather than around him. As for Rapunzel, she endured the wild waste where Dame Gothel had left her. She learned the hardness of sun and the cruelty of thorns. She tore her hands gathering roots and berries. She drank from cold streams and slept among stones. Loneliness returned, but it was no longer the contained loneliness of the tower. It was the vast loneliness of open land under pitiless stars. In time, sorrow ripened within her into strength. She gave birth in that desolate place to twins, a boy and a girl, the children of the prince. And though terror accompanied their birth, love met it and did not yield. She became fierce for them. The wilderness altered around her. What at first seemed only barren began to reveal hidden mercies. A spring, wild figs, shelter among rocks, birds that warned her of snakes. She sang to the children as once she had sung from the tower window, and her voice, though roughened by grief, remained beautiful. Those songs threaded through the empty land and into the years. One evening, when the air was full of dust and red sunset, and the children drowsed against her, Rapunzel felt a strange shiver run through her, as if some old invisible cord had tightened. She rose. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a man was calling a name. Her name. The voice was hoarse, older, nearly broken by exhaustion, but she knew it. She ran, across dry grass and stone, carrying one child and pulling the other by the hand. She followed the sound until she saw him stumbling toward her through the last of the light. Clothes torn, face scarred, eyes white and ruined, yet unmistakably him. The prince halted, sensing someone near. "Who is there?" he asked, and his voice trembled. Rapunzel stopped before him. For a moment, she could not speak. Then his name left her mouth like a prayer. He went rigid. His hands lifted blindly, searching, and found her face. Her hair cut short, no longer the burden it had once been, her shoulders, the children clinging to her skirts. A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob, and he drew her against him. They wept together. Her tears fell upon his blinded eyes. In the old tale, it is said those tears restored his sight, and so it was here as well. But restoration, in stories born of dark roots, is not always gentle. As the tears touched the scarred hollows, he cried out and clutched her arms. A burning began beneath the ruined flesh. He fell to his knees. Rapunzel knelt with him in terror, thinking she had harmed him, but then the white film over his eyes shivered and split like old milk skin. New sight flooded in with such pain that he gasped and shook. He looked up at her through tears and saw. He saw her face, changed by suffering and strength. He saw their children. He saw the wild plain behind her. And for the first time in years, he saw the world not through memory, but through living light. Joy almost undid them both. Yet Dame Gothel was not finished. Far away in the tower, or perhaps in another house no map could find, the witch felt the breaking of her work. Some enchantments are threads, some are hooks, some are cages built inside the heart. When Rapunzel's tears restored the prince and reunited what Dame Gothel had sundered, something snapped. And when old magic snaps, it does not do so quietly. That night, the air darkened too soon. The children woke crying. The wind rose in long, circular sweeps that bent the grasses flat. Birds fled. The light from the stars seemed to withdraw. Rapunzel stood outside their rough shelter and knew, with a certainty colder than reason, that Dame Gothel was coming. She arrived with the storm. No horse bore her. No footstep announced her. One moment the plain was empty. The next she stood at its edge in her green gown, untouched by the dust whipping around her. Her face was beautiful again, but in the way corpses are sometimes beautiful beneath still water. Her eyes fixed on Rapunzel, then on the prince, then on the children. "You should have remained where I placed you," she said. The prince stepped before Rapunzel, but fear moved through him like an old remembered blade. He had seen what waited behind the witch's human shape. Dame Gothel lifted one hand, and the ground between them blackened. Thorn vines burst upward in twisting masses, writhing like nests of snakes. The children screamed. The prince drew his sword, but the metal shuddered in his grip, as though it wished to leap free and bury itself in the soil. Rapunzel, holding both children to her, felt for the first time not only terror, but rage. All her life had been arranged by this woman. Her parents' grief, her tower years, her shorn hair, her exile, her suffering, the theft of choice, the theft of sky and touch and time. Even now Dame Gothel looked at her not as one person looks upon another, but as an owner looks upon an object escaped from the shelf. "No," Rapunzel said. It was only one word, yet the wind shifted at it. Dame Gothel smiled thinly. "You belong to me." "No." Rapunzel stepped forward. The children clung to her skirts. Her cut hair stirred in the storm. Her voice rose, not in speech now, but in song. Not the sweet song of the tower meant to ease loneliness. This was deeper, older. It came from all the sealed years within her, from the cradle torn away from her mother, from the stone chamber, from the wilderness, from grief and love, and the first wild taste of freedom. The notes struck the air like bells cracked by frost. The thorn vines recoiled. The prince stared at her in astonishment. Dame Gothel's expression changed. For all her years of shaping Rapunzel, of brushing and oiling and charming her hair, of keeping her apart, she had never understood fully what she had cultivated. Not a possession, not a caged songbird, something living and powerful in its own right. The song rose higher. The plain answered. The thorn vines turned, not toward Rapunzel and her family, but toward Dame Gothel. The grasses bent inward. The dust thickened into spirals around the witch's feet. For the first time, genuine alarm flashed across her face. "Stop," she said. Rapunzel sang louder. Dame Gothel staggered back. Her human glamour peeled at the edges. The green gown darkened. The skin of her throat showed gray beneath its fair surface. Her hair unbound itself and streamed out in black strands like a nest of eels. Her fingers lengthened. Her mouth widened. The children buried their faces in Rapunzel's skirts. The prince, though horrified, did not look away. The thorn vines seized Dame Gothel's ankles. She shrieked then, and the sound was so sharp and ancient that stones seemed to ring with it. More thorns wound around her legs, her waist, her arms. She clawed at them, cursing in a language that tasted of graves. Her face shifted between beauty and ruin, between mother and monster, between stately woman and root-thin corpse. The glamour tore apart in strips. "Rapunzel," she cried then, and in that voice there was suddenly something terrible and pitiful, like hunger speaking from the bottom of a well. "Child, daughter, love me." But Rapunzel heard at last the emptiness beneath every kindness. The cold appetite, the possession, the need to keep and consume. She stopped singing only when the thorns had dragged Dame Gothel to the earth. The storm broke at once. Wind died, dust settled, twilight opened overhead. Where the witch had fallen there remained only a heap of blackened vines, and tangled among them a few gray hairs and bones so old and dry they crumbled when touched by air. Silence spread across the plain. Rapunzel stood shaking, the children clinging to her, the prince beside her. Then slowly the night sounds returned. One insect, then another, a far-off bird. The world, held in dread for too long, seemed to exhale. When dawn came, the family left that place behind. The prince brought Rapunzel and their children to his kingdom, where there was astonishment and celebration and fear in equal measure at the tale of what had befallen them. In time they were wed openly, though in truth their hearts had chosen long before witness or blessing. The people loved Rapunzel for her gentleness and her strength. They loved the children, bright and curious and unafraid of forests. Songs were made of the prince who lost his sight and found it again through faithful love. Yet no old horror ever ends without leaving a stain. Rapunzel slept poorly for many years. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, she would wake certain. She heard a voice below her chamber, patient and familiar, calling for her to let down her hair. Though her hair never grew again to its former impossible length, she kept it short by choice, and no hand but her own ever touched scissors to it. Mirrors unsettled her. Locked rooms terrified her. When storm clouds gathered green over the hills, she would gather her children close, even when they were nearly grown. And sometimes, while walking the palace gardens, she would come upon a patch of Rapunzel growing where no gardener had planted it. Fresh, green, beaded with water though the morning was dry. At such moments, a chill passed through her, and she would have the plants torn out root and all. Yet by the following season, they would return in some other corner. As for the old tower, travelers claimed it still stood deep within the forest for many years after. Some said the window glimmered at dusk. Some said a girl's voice still drifted from it on certain evenings, singing to no one. Brave fools sought it, hoping for treasure or adventure, but few found the clearing and fewer still returned with their minds untroubled. There were whispers of golden hair seen hanging from the window in moonlight. There were whispers of a woman below, looking up and smiling. Perhaps those were only stories, or perhaps places where great fear has lived do not empty easily, and perhaps names spoken often enough become doors. So if one late evening you pass near a wall overgrown with ivy and glimpse on the other side a patch of impossibly vivid green, do not climb, do not steal, do not tell yourself that love excuses every trespass or that hunger justifies every bargain. And if you ever wander too deep into the forest and find a clearing where the grass has withered in a ring around an old stone tower with no door and one dark window high above, do not wait to hear who calls from within, because some voices know exactly what you long for. Some mothers are not mothers. Some gardens grow more than roots. And somewhere in the dark, beyond the edge of the firelight, there may still come a patient voice, smooth as damp silk and old as the grave, saying the words that once opened the tower and unmade so many lives. Rapunzel, let down your hair, that I may climb the golden stair. Thank you for listening. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of the night will forever intertwine.